Just finishing another meeting. I do have apologies from Jonathan and Alan, who are obviously overseas. Late apology from Ross, who let you know, and haven't heard from Rogan. I'm not sure. Eric, sorry. Oh, has he? Okay. And Mike, you were going to be late. Right. Okay. All right. So, just a reminder that this workshop is public. So we're going to talk about the long-term plan workshop. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Bernie. Kia ora koutou. Good afternoon, everybody. Yes, today we are focused on consultation and engagement for the long-term plan. So the purpose of today's presentation is to share ideas for consultation and engagement and to seek your ideas and feedback as well. What we want from today's briefing or workshop is to know whether you can see yourselves leading this, what information and support you would like, and again, any other ideas and feedback that you have as we build this program. We remain firmly in the do part of our triangle, seeking your guidance, feedback, ideas. So we are turning our magnifying glass to this part of our journey. We are coming towards the end of audit and heading towards the adoption of the consultation document and supporting information in 3 weeks' time. Consultation period starts on the 15th of March and runs through till mid-April, and it's that period that we are focused on. As we look at consultation and engagement, key objectives that we've identified and would welcome your feedback on as well are to build awareness of the key topics included in the long-term plan, to make it easy for people to be involved and to make submissions, to increase our community engagement and submissions for the LTP, focusing on harder to reach segments of our population. We'd like to build on successful approaches used in the LTPA, where consultation and engagement was elected member-led, and we'd provide the support with information and officers as needed. Citizens panels, Facebook Lives, and the Open Day, we all really received a lot of really good feedback from yourselves and others for all of those. So I'd like to include those as well. We'd like to use our budget and resource to best effect, fitting with the tone and themes of the long-term plan itself and the situation that we're in. We're proposing that we print fewer consultation documents, but to make it really accessible for people, that we're going to have a business card with a QR code on it that people can scan, and it takes them right through to the submission document and the consultation document itself. We'll talk more about the other ways that we'd provide information so that people can still get hard copies if they prefer, but we propose to do that to reduce costs. So as we look at increasing the reach of our processes, we pulled out the stats from the LTPA and what the submissions showed us. We've started collecting some demographic data, and if we look at the age one in particular, it showed that we had really good representation from those aged 35 and over. For those under 35, our youth in particular, much less representation, and we propose that we'd like to try and add in a few more ways of engaging so that we can increase participation and bring those ideas and feedback in as well. So we'll speak to some ideas for that as we continue through. So a key part of this is the journey to make it easier for people to engage and submit. And so what we've done here is put together a basic journey map, the experience that people will have as they come through our engagement process. So on the 15th of March, consultation and engagement opens. There'll be a range of ways that people can get information, including ways that we currently use through the Community Connection, that's the CC, through libraries and community centres, through radio, and through the new ways with the business cards with QR codes on them. Great. So we would have, some hard copies, submission forms and consultation documents at all our libraries and community centres. We'll be advertising this so people can drop in and get hard copies if they do prefer that means of communication. And then people will have questions. There's going to be lots of ways people can find out more information: by ringing us, by emailing the ltp@horowhenua.govt email address, through Kapas with a Counsellor, through citizens panels, Facebook Lives, and through drop-in submission help sessions that we're proposing to run over at Te Takiritanga, Okuraho Po, Te Awaho Newsroom, and in Shannon. And that would be an officer with the process, not to influence their submission, but just to help with the process. And then people can make these submissions in a way that suits them. They can do it through the online form that we'll have set up, as they could previously, by emailing, and we're looking at ways to expand that, or through hard copy. People will receive an acknowledgement. They need to know that we've received that. And for those who'd like to speak to their submissions, we'll help them booking a hearing slot if they wish. We're bringing new software in that will give them a smoother experience for that as well, in terms of choosing times that they can come and speak. Then coming to speak, we were thinking last time during the LTPA hearings that it would be potentially really helpful if we had a how-to video of what it's like to come and make an oral submission. Just basically walking someone through what happens. You know, you make the booking, and then when you come to council, who do you see? Where do you go? What do you do? Even like sitting in these chairs, you push the button for the microphone. What we'd really like to do is make it easy and less scary, demystify it, that is coming in for a conversation. And so we'd like to do that as well, and we'd share that through social media and on our website. And then to feed back to people, like we did last time, we would put out a newsletter, an email newsletter only this time we're proposing, to everybody, setting out what the decisions were so that everybody finds that out. We would also print that in Community Connection. We'd have some hard copies in our libraries and community centres, all of the places that people could find the information in the first instance. So we want to close that loop, and so people can really see what happened to submissions that they made coming through the decision-making process, and then what that means for going forward. Does anybody have any comments or questions about that?
It's just a random question. Why do we have to have a physical consultation document? Could we, and this might be just too expensive or logistically impossible, but why can't we, for example, just publish the consultation document inside the Community Connection in the Chronicle, and then have a whole lot of extra copies printed, as in like the insert, and then it's just like newsprint, so it's not like a formal document, but is that possible, or is it too long?
Be too long. We are trying to make it shorter than the LTPA one. We could explore the materials that the document's printed on. I'll double check the language in the LGA, but it's about making the consultation document available to people, and so I think that's the reason. I'll double check the wording, but it's required through there, is my understanding.
Cool, thanks for that. I think it's really important we do try and. I've had quite a bit of feedback around coming to submit and how, I think your terminology was like kind of cool, but it is challenging, and I think once you're sitting around this table, then you probably don't sort of look at it from that side of the ledger. So I think that is important. I think this sort of educational aspect, I think, would be really key to the community. I'm also really keen. I think having that sort of location-based offices just to help through that process, I think is quite good, and especially in Shannon, they've been pretty keen on that sort of side of things as well. So I think it's great. It's awesome.
Following on from that, Caro, is it absolutely necessary that people that want to speak to us have to do it in a formal hearings process? I mean, is it possible that we could maybe have a slightly less, informal sort of hearing, whether it's, just around the table somewhere, rather than, because I know it is daunting for a lot of people. The first thing they often say, I'm not used to public speaking, I don't like this, but so if we can make it more a conversation rather than a sort of a hearing, I don't know how we do that, but just I think we need to explore that a little bit.
That, yes, and Lee.
You're trying to send you a signal, Justin.
And just picking up on Justin's point, given what we're proposing, 17.4, the ability for everyone in the community to know what that means for them, and although we've emphasised, email and electronic and so on, and I know there's a considerable cost involved, 25k or whatever was mentioned, is there the will to indicate to property owners what it means to them through an actual postage system at the start of the process, and then incorporate how they can engage with us as a result of that?
We can explore that. Yeah.
Just, honest conversation stuff too. If that is too costly, or if that's deemed not to be appropriate, we need to understand that at some stage, have a conversation about that. I just have a real fear, given that this is going to be a real tough time for the community as well as for us, that everyone needs to be included in what it means at a personal level to them. You can't have a good conversation if they're going to come back later and say, if only we'd known, picking up Justin's point, we're not into emails or whatever. So.
Yeah, so the guidance I've given the team is that they were just going to wait to test the cost for me, but that, like what we did last year, where we sent every ratepayer the letter that said, here's what we consulted on, here's the proposed rates increase, and this is what it could mean for you, that we would do that again. The concept of sending every ratepayer a consultation document is certainly cost prohibitive. That's something we could not afford. That's right, isn't it, Lisa?
But the how to engage.
Oh, absolutely, in the letter, yeah.
The how to engage.
Yeah.
I think also you'll see later in the presentation, we've put a large focus on focus groups and workshops with different groups, with the intention that we could have them in here like we did for the citizen panel focus groups, and we'll be able to record them, which we can use as a way of showing what people are thinking and feeling, to sort of break down the barrier. But another good idea that came from a brainstorming session was council officers and elected members sitting alongside those people that are in those focus groups or workshops and helping them to make submissions while they're in the moment. So that's something we could look to explore as well.
Sorry, just quickly, the last one as well is anyone will be able to either ring, come into the front desk, or go online themselves and ask what the impact is for them at any point, and they'll be able to access that information as well. So just to flag that side as well.
Sorry, Lisa. The matter around increasing the engagement of young people, there's already in earlier workshops mentioned going to school assemblies, or at least for the 3 colleges. And then I think putting a station in HLC, because they don't do assemblies, and at youth space, like actually have a physical kiosk or some sort of thing there. But even the way that young people want to engage, if they don't want to write, are they able to, upload a video that says, we like the idea of this, we support that, or we don't, or whatever? Is that granted as a submission?
Yeah, we've with the long-term plan amendment, we were looking at whether we could accept audio and video submissions. So we've done a bit of work in the back end to see how it would integrate with our back end systems and whether we can do that. But it's on our radar to be able to do that so that it's more accessible for people, particularly when spoken language might not be, when written language isn't the preferred language of choice. So, very conscious that there's going to be a lot of discussion around the 17.4% proposed rates increase, and we're proposing to do a brand campaign that looks at how we partner with the community to deliver the services that we do and the value that council provides to the services, but how really it's because of the ratepayer and how they enable us to provide those services. So we'd look to kick this off ahead of the adoption period with these are just some starters for 10. Because of you, I can get to and from school safely. Because of you, we're safer in the water. Because of you, I have somewhere to feel companionship. Because of you, our youth have a safe place to be. Because of you, I have somewhere to learn to swim. Because of you, our district is kept clean. And they're just a few examples of how we want to thank the ratepayer really for, the fact that it's their rates that pay for all of those things and we're in it together. Shifting the narrative from what does council do for us, and so this is the work of Christine actually. She's done a great job, but that's what we're planning to kick off. This ad set will run alongside all of the sort of direct messaging and the other social media until the end of the consultation. Just kick in with any questions at any time if you've got them. I want to get your feel on this too because I think it's really important. So we'll obviously have that level of brand messaging, and then our primary messaging is, our strap line, empathising about the cost of living and that we're not immune to the cost of living. I think making it clear that even with a 17.4% rates increase, we're looking at service level cuts. And obviously getting into our key topics and what that means for our community and sort of how they feel about those and how to make a submission. But we'd also look to tailor the messaging to key audiences. So when we're talking with youth, for example, when one of the proposed service level cuts is potentially closing our youth space on a Sunday, or we're talking about our waste minimisation plan and asking for ideas and aspirations around waste in the future, what does that mean to our young people? So, we've got a bunch of groups that will follow of who we think we should be engaging with, but really trying to tailor our messaging to those groups. Business is another example. If we're proposing to target an economic development rate to businesses. What is the value that they'll get out of that? What are they currently receiving from that? And why should they? Why is the preferred option the preferred option? Secondary messaging, alongside the long-term plan, we're essentially consulting on the waste minimisation and management plan, so asking for ideas and innovation around that. We've put some, based on your feedback, we've put some copy into the consultation document that aligns with the fact that when we closed the Lyvern landfill, we thought we would be in a better position to think more aspirationally about waste minimisation and management, but actually quickly realised that we need to fix the basics first, but still wanting people's ideas around that area. That we're not alone in this significant rates increase, that some councils are looking down the barrel of a 30% increase. I think there's some really technical terms in the consultation document too that we could explain in plain English. So what does fully rate funded operational costs and depreciation costs mean for council and community, and the fact that after a 3-year time horizon we'd be looking to put a 10% rate increase cap, I think is a really key message. Comparing rates with other household costs, and then options available for those who may struggle to pay their rates. Are there any additions that we need to make, or any concerns or guidance that you'd like to give us around messaging?
Lisa, I suppose I'm trying to understand the relationship between the brand messaging and then the primary and secondary messaging, because the brand messaging to me seems to be focused on young people. That's the way I see it anyway, but the primary messaging and secondary messaging seems to be about those that are paying the rates, and they're not quite the same sort of lot. And I just wonder about how that's going to actually, whether the brand messaging needs to be a bit more strengthened, if you like, in terms of the message that sends, because their primary and secondary message is much more about costs and rates than that. That's just my feedback on that. That's all.
I think it's important that we don't, like the Because of You campaign, which has some really good intent behind it. That's not your LTP campaign. It's just maybe how it's presented there. It makes it like it's a campaign that will run hopefully longer than the LTP. Like it runs forever. But I hear your message about, at the moment, they're quite child or young people centric messages, and we can firm them up into some of that other stuff that the ratepayer contributes to. Yeah. Message heard.
Is it because of you, or is it because of council?
Can I just respond to that, Councillor Tamihana? It's because of our community.
Okay,
And I suppose there's an interesting campaign at the moment that's run by local government New Zealand, which is, it's really good, but it's around, you can play on a cricket pitch because council, is maintaining it, but we've tried to flip that to really look at what our community does to enable us to maintain that cricket pitch, and try and create this idea of partnership, that we're in it together, that we need the community to buy into this, and we are appreciative of the rate dollars that we do get.
So for me, it's just defining who you is then. Is it council? Is it community? Is it?
Yeah, I just wonder, maybe following the workshop, we could get Christine to send out the really great work she's done, which reflects on often a council campaign can kind of have a bit of a negative or tone to it, where it's about council, but actually this is about like you, the ratepayer, you a member of our community, you're contributing to this because council is community, right?
Yeah, it's not quite very definitive, that's all for me, I just.
My turn? Resonate with the comments that have been made already just about, being more clear about who the you is. But I was actually thinking about the voice of our rangatahi. And right now we've got this project going on uptown where we've got our youth out there telling a story, and we're getting huge hits on all our social media pages about our kids telling this beautiful story. And so I'm sitting here thinking to myself, why don't they tell the story? Why don't they be the ones that say that it's because of our community that I'm able to participate in these things? I'm able to go and use the aquatic centre. Because the other thing I sit here and I think about is, you say because of you, but actually you don't have a choice. Rates aren't a choice. That's something you pay regardless, and so your contribution as a ratepayer is embedded in life. And so that's my only two comments. I just think that why can't we use our rangatahi that right now are already out in our community, they're in front of our community, and it's a story I think that they could share, and it brings their generation into the mix, who is actually who we need to capture. That's just my thoughts.
Some key audiences, Māori and Pacifica, the Youth Voice, obviously Council, Contracted Services, and our various Elder People's Network, Access and Inclusion Network, Education, Horowhenua, Youth Services, various community groups and business, our citizens panels, and then some more specific groups. We'll be looking to use our traditional media channels, and looking to do something interactive around the workshops, so that it's a two-way conversation, and also to prevent a sort of traditional, we present them a presentation, they discuss, or they come in and talk to us about their views on the long-term plan. I think that the focus group format where we asked different questions and got people to interact and talk to one another and, for example, list what their priorities were as an individual and then come together as a group and understand that what their priorities were might not necessarily match up to their group's priorities, which is a good reflection of how, as elected members, you operate. So I think we can do some smart stuff in that space. We've been talking about it, potentially a budgeting game that we used for a previous consultation, where we have essentially how much money we've got to spend, what we need to spend it on, and then what the trade-off is between service level and dollars, but on a pared back basis. So I've got our designers are thinking about how we can make that fun and interactive. Also the how-to video, and traditionally our Let's Kōrero page. Social media will play a huge part, as will radio. We'd look to also provide you with FAQs and any sort of anything that will help you to feel confident having that discussion with our community. Really keen to recruit more people on our citizens panel and engage them, because it was really effective last time. And this is just, it looks a lot, but I'll talk through it. It's just our comms and engagement calendar. Essentially, the orange posties are the events that are happening in the district, not necessarily events that we think that we need to go along to, because I feel like learning from past consultation, sorry, it might be a little bit hard to read, but learning from past consultations, some events didn't give us the most bang for buck. For example, the Foxton Easter Fair while it was good to be along there, I remember you were there last year with Jana, Councillor Tamihana. We did get good engagement, but people were largely there to go to the fair and didn't really want to talk about council's LTP. So this year we propose having really deliberate focus groups that target specific groups. So rather than having to go along to multiple ratepayer association evenings, for example, getting all of the ratepayer association members into a room and having a deliberate focus group with them, much the same as the citizens panel, much the same as the youth voice. So, reaching out to the We Are Horowhenua campaign peeps and asking them to be involved alongside our youth council and any other youth ambassadors that want to take part. And I know that Mark Hammond and Nat are really keen to help lead stuff in that space as well. We'll have the brand campaign, a radio campaign, and then we'll look to do Facebook Lives once a week, every week for the duration of the campaign, focusing on the key topics, but also, the fact consultation opens, how to make a submission, that sort of thing. In previous years, we've put a submission form into the Community Connection, but it hasn't driven a lot of submissions, so we're proposing not to do that this year and to really drive online submission alongside the rest of the other channels that people can provide input into. That's sort of the bare bones of what engagement will look like. Has anyone got any questions? We're just working with Mark as well to understand which meetings fall within this group, or whether we need to do a separate hui with the likes of Access and Inclusion and Education Horowhenua and the Older Persons Network and all of the community groups that we the Community Wellbeing Committee, to see whether we might do a special focus group for them as well.
Just wondering, Lisa, has any analysis been done of when we get the majority of our responses and submissions? Is it in that last few days? And I'm just worried about all the upfront stuff that we're doing. Is that needed so that people take a month to respond? Or, I'm just wondering in terms of, the amount of focus that we do, that then leads to people rushing in 24 hours before we close off submissions and putting them in.
We can come back with the numbers, but from the LTPA, about half the submissions came in the last week. So there was that rush towards the end, but we can provide you a better breakdown because we've got the dates that we received them all.
And I think you mentioned it earlier, Cara, but the idea of, or it might have been Lisa, the idea of getting the submissions on the spot there and then as much as possible, capturing the moment while it's fresh. If we keep that front of mind too in the various engagements.
Just the last slide for me as well is obviously our iwi and hapu partners are incredibly important to us, and so we've reached out to Te Matakāhuki and Mo'opoko Tribal Authority, and we're just working with them to help them guide us on what Māori engagement should look like. But we're also leaning on our elected members too to guide us on what sort of how we best engage with iwi and hapu, and if you have any ideas on what might be effective.
I suppose for me, just following up on that last point, if we're going to consider having targeted workshops for ratepayers and other groupings like that, then perhaps we offer the same to our iwi partners, and we can run through the process with them if there was an appetite to do that. But I'm just thinking maybe that's a consideration. The only other thing I was just going to comment, and I just said to Councillor Olsen that a couple of the councillors last week was interesting because not one person raised the LTP. It was everything but. So just sharing that as well, that we don't always get the conversations we're thinking we're going to get when we're engaging our community. And because a couple of the councillors obviously quite broad, you can talk about anything you want, but I was expecting people to come in and ask us questions around the long-term plan and never received one. So, yeah.
Kia ora malo lava soifua, me Bernie and councillors. We've been looking at new opportunities to explore. A team of us from across different teams, cultural outcomes, community development, comms, solid waste, and our planning team. So we got together and we just looked at other opportunities that we could explore to reach our harder to reach audience. So one of the things we got up there is to host a student councillors workshop, kind of like similar to the citizens panel, but more tailored to our student councillors. And we could have them maybe come on a day of the week into council. And so there could be different representatives from the schools around Horowhenua, but we could also maybe invite some representatives from like HLC, Life to the Max, Tupu Aotearoa, where other youth also attend, and so it could be a workshop on the consultation topics, and then they would break into groups to discuss, and then this process will hopefully lead to them making individual submissions. So that's what we've got for the first opportunity there. And then we also looked at school visits, as mentioned earlier. And so I've got an example there of Live in East because they have shown interest. And so how they see us would be like could be attended by council staff, maybe elective members to come in on a day, run an interactive session, and we could find a way to record when the children are sharing their thoughts, but also that their aspirations for the children is that they will have a voice, that there is power in their voice. And so that was some great feedback from community. And so we've also got like community groups, and I've got consult with community leaders there. So community leaders across different community groups, they have a wider reach. So working alongside community leaders, so say for example, you've got like maybe Pacifica community groups that their leaders are really keen to get their communities to make a submission, because a lot of them have never made a submission before, and so they're willing to work alongside how could that be tailored to suit their audience, because we're looking at language considerations. A lot of them are uncomfortable with technology, so we'll best be guided by the community leaders in that space, but I guess we're there to support and guide that process, and whether we need like a staff and maybe elected members to be present. And so a lot of these groups are already running regular sessions of whatever that is, throughout the weeks or monthly. And so rather than trying to get people to attend, you can go along, and if they're keen to have that, that's even better, because they already, they trust their leaders. So whatever their leaders will say, like we think that you should, voice your opinion, they respect their leaders, so they're more willing to turn up to that session. And so there's some relationship building to happen in that space in order for that to take place. And so, so that's under community groups. And then we've also got influencers in the community. So as mentioned before, why not let the youth tell the story? And so there are definitely youth influencers. There may be leaders, community leaders, youth leaders, where people already follow them on social media. But in our community, so it could be like different target audience, you would have a different influencer in that space. And so they will talk about, whether it's a TikTok or something on Facebook, they will share what the LTP, but breaking it down so that they would understand, and that and again, influencers play a huge part, because they'll be like, oh, I look up to that person, I hear the importance of making a submission, and so I'm willing to listen in and follow that. Any questions before I move to the next? slide. Awesome. So, as Lisa mentioned earlier, we also got Mark and Nat who are willing to lead also some of these amazing ideas. So, we're looking at workshops, focus meetings with community network groups. So, you can see Youth Services Network, Older Persons Network, Inclusion, Access and Inclusion Network, and Education Hawhanoi's mentioned. And then Youth Voice, our rangatahi session. So, as you've heard, like some interactive sessions with games that can really encourage our youth to participate, but also really raise their awareness on what we're consulting on, and just really hope that we get more of that youth voice. And then community facilities, pop-up consultation spots. So where these high foot traffic spaces, we could have like static displays there, and this could be activated by having a subject matter expert managing these spaces. Anything to add? Thank you.
Thank you. If there's no questions or additional feedback on that, we'll just move to the next one, which is about getting your feedback about all of this. So were there any general questions? You've given some feedback already about how we could engage with iwi and hapu effectively. What in here do you like? Is there anything that you don't like? What's missing? And how can we support you so you're confident to lead the consultation and engagement process, such as supporting material assistance during the process?
Just in terms of the online submission, would it be possible for EMs to have an opportunity to test that submission process before we go out live with it? Just so that we can build an understanding around what the mechanics are going through that online submission as well. I think building on the Facebook Live images, but maybe thinking about much shorter, sharper EM speaking to issues. It might just be one point that can then be rotated through. Might get a little bit more cut through than a 30-45 minute time slot with EMs that might have people tune in now or later or whenever, but just sort of soundbite type topic points speaking to by elected members as well. And I certainly, through the last LPTA process, we spoke about place, and I haven't yet heard plans, I guess, to going to another place than this place, whether that be Marae-based, school-based, I like the idea of, but also we've got our Shannon community, we've got our Foxton community. How could we potentially make sure that we are going to all our communities in our district with some form of workshop or citizens panel or something to make sure that that is covered. And I had one more point. Let's see if it comes back to me. It might not. I'll think of it in a minute and chime back in.
Can I just clarify? When I like the idea of sound bites. When you talk about that though, are you meaning more pre-recorded soundbite, like on a topic or a key message that we might record an elected member talking about, and it's not a Facebook Live, but it would be part of a video series that would help to explain the key information in the consultation document that would send out via socials?
Yeah, cool. Yeah, cool. You may or may not be aware that the Long-Term Plan Council are looking to invest $2 million into a new doggy park right here in this space. Tell us what you think. And the last point about that came back to me was just about the hearing process. So and I've heard the thing about it being very formal is this U-shaped setup that we've got. So and I know that there'll be some constraints that we need to adhere to still be a hearing, but thinking about moving towards open space, freestanding mics, so that there isn't this U-shape or isn't this barrier between talking, so that we can try and make it as informal in an informal environment as we can. I think might be some consideration we can kind of think about.
I don't want to. I haven't talked to Ash before this, but I did speak to her a wee while ago, and I know that when we did the 2021 2041 consultation around Foxton Pools in particular, I think actually we got around 200 submissions via email, because it was easier for people to email us rather than go through an online submission form. So that's definitely something that we'd be looking to re-establish as well, whether that's templated or not and how we work with that. So I'll get your guidance on that too, Ash.
Thank you. If there's no additional feedback, we come to looking ahead to our next steps. So
Tara,
thank you.
Sorry, I just wanted to, because there's been some good feedback which is helpful, and I know that off that feedback you and the team will go away and revise the plan. I probably just want to test with council that this meets your expectations and that you're up for this, because there's a lot in there and it won't all be officer led. It's been driven to be elected member led, and so I just want to make sure that, is it too much? Is it not enough? Is it about right? What do you have an allergic reaction to?
I'll go first. No, I think it's good. I think it's definitely going to be a team approach, as far as some heavy lifting, if you like. But I do like the idea of probably being aligned to one or two events there that you can sort of take a bit of control with the officers and charge forward. So it's good.
Yeah, I don't think we can do too much in terms of consulting with the community. And as far as any of that goes with whatever's required for elected members, I'm good for any or all of it. So I'm on board. Use me up.
I guess what I need to see in there is some point in time where elected members fill in where they're prepared to go, because the ideas are great, but for them to work, we have to have elected members actually signing up to those different events. So is there a sort of a spot in time where we want that to happen?
I'm really keen to get your feedback on what day of the week would suit you best for focus groups. So at the moment, for example, we've got Facebook Lives on a Monday and focus groups roughly on a Tuesday, but does that suit the majority of you, or would you prefer us to... I know the Facebook Lives work quite well when we're consistent with the day and the time. So just keen to get your input into what days would work best for you for events and for lives, and then we can build out a sort of a schedule that you can input it into your portal so that you can all choose the spots that suit you.
Are you asking for that now? Are you saying that'll be part of the feedback?
If do Mondays and Tuesdays work best for the majority of you to have Facebook Lives and focus groups on, or would you prefer us to rejig this and put them on different days? I've steered clear of Wednesdays, but if Wednesdays were an option,
Monday and Tuesdays are fine, Lisa. Make that executive decision, please.
all I was going to say is I don't think the day of the week is the big deal. It's the time of day, I think, is the most important thing, because if they're during the day, during working hours, we're almost saying that we are only wanting feedback from a certain portion of our community. So, but equally, I know that evenings are also not suitable for some people. But so I think that there has to be a mix of opportunities, because we'll miss out on a huge chunk of our ratepayers and community if we hold them during the day.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and I'll just go back to the citizens panel focus groups for the long-term plan amendment, because I don't know if you remember the Shannon one, Deputy Mayor Alan, but we had very few people turn up to that, so we were told that the community wanted it in a place that was familiar to them. We hired out the hall, and then we had very little people show up, and so I suppose it would be great once we set these dates for all of you to talk about this with your contingent, with your electoral, with the community, basically, to drum up business, so that if we do go far and wide, which is great, that they're well attended. Because what worked well was when we have it, and I totally get your point, Councillor Grimstone, but when we had it here, we were able to have the microphones which allowed us to record the video and the audio of the group. When we have it at Te Awaho or at Shannon, we don't have that luxury, so that's just a consideration for us to think about too. But I know that you've been working with Sharon Williams as well on having an event in Shannon, so we'll want to add that sort of event in too when you have a date.
Sorry, I remember last time we had the citizen panel for Foxton at night, and we had the citizen panel for Levin, and at the one at Foxton there were people from Levin there, because they couldn't make it and wanted to make sure that they had the input. So that mix is quite important, definitely.
In the this pre-consultation period between when you kick off, so from now through to end of February, early March, had you considered about maybe throwing up an expressions of interest or an opportunity to hire an elected member or something like that to come and talk to specific community groups in their space? So, if you went out early, then you might be able to engage some of these community groups to come along to the focus group. But just as easily, you might be able to send Justin off to speak to Rotary and Levin, or any of the other groups that might then sort of say, we want to hear from someone. And then it may not be specific, but it could just be talking about long-term plan. It could be any elected member that could then go along to that meeting to talk to that group in their space, in their time.
Yep, absolutely, and that's what happened last time. I remember Waikawa Beach Ratepayers Association. We had multiple groups that we ended up having, elected members and council officers going to. So if you're willing to commit to multiple events that require multiple evenings across multiple community groups and ratepayers associations, and lead that conversation, absolutely we can go hard and try and recruit, ask them what nights. We've already started making a list with what nights they meet and that sort of stuff, so that if we wanted to, we could reach out to them. Or equally, if they wanted to come and have a session together, it might just be a better use of resource, although it's not meeting them at their place when they're meeting. So I think a mixture might be the best option to make sure that each event is well attended by elected members.
I think building that elected member toolkit will be really important. So it can be a really basic 10-page presentation about an LPTA that, in theory, any member around this table could rock up to and talk to the 10 slides that happen to pop up. Within that toolkit, I would imagine that we'd be able to have some of your social media feeds, social media posts, and then that way we can then use that through our own Facebook pages to prompt post reminders, as well as obviously share what's coming through council page. But if we've got the ability to plug into that sort of stuff, then that gives us the ability to use and share and spread that message.
So we'll take that.
You know, when consultation kicks off mid-March to April, are these Wednesdays for us still full on, or is it a full program or is it lighter, which means there's some of that time we can use, or no?
It's a good question. We'll check the tracker sheet, and where there's opportunities to make a Wednesday lighter, we will. But I can't promise that, just given the other bits of our work program. Thank you for that feedback. That's really helpful. The team will take that away, finalise the plan, get it uploaded to your portal, and then encourage you to start populating what you can attend, and then we'll make sure things are in calendars. Probably the bit that I'm just, because I want to manage expectations, is that when the team have done the dreaming and the thinking about the opportunities, of which there are many, because we want to encourage engagement, that I've challenged the team to really apply that efficiency and effectiveness lens to that. So we want to make sure that, because we're having a tough conversation with the community about challenging times, challenging choices, that the way in which we engage demonstrates council's effectiveness and efficiency, and how the amount of council officers we're using at events, down to the type of paper that we print stuff on.
Thank you. And in addition to that work on the communications and engagement plan, we are also still finalising the draft of the consultation document. And so we'll be sending you a draft on Friday. And so this is building towards adoption of it in March at the council meeting. So when we send it on Friday, we'd be asking you to please provide initial feedback by Monday, and we'll update it and get it back to you for the Wednesday workshop next week. And we'll have some of the sections of the LTP designed up so that you can see what it will look like when you see the whole thing. We'll then take any additional feedback that you've got on that Wednesday, and any that you provide, please, by the end of day on Thursday, to compile the final draft for that Friday, the 23rd. The agenda goes out for council on the following week, and so we'd like to have it ready to go out at that time. And so that's why we've got these time frames. And then looking specifically at the workshop next week, it is our workshop, it's post-audit, pre-adoption update. We will also be bringing back to you the draft development contributions policy and figures. We'll have some updates to fees and charges with some trade waste fees added, the revised consultation document, and the revised communications and engagement plan. And that's next week, and that brings us to a close if there are no questions for the LTP workshop today.
Sorry, just highlighting there is a second part of the LTP workshop.
Yes, sorry, I was about to click onto rates for emission.
Thanks, everyone. So I'll introduce Daniel and I are here today to talk through. So before Christmas, when we heard the submissions on the rates remission policy, we were asked to go away and have a look at the rates remission policy again, and particularly in relation to looking at the level of funding that we have and looking at whether there are any other options that we could put in place before we look to finalise the policy. So what we're going to do today is talk you through that. We have, so you voted on the decision to hold it. And what I wanted to let you know is, so the budget that we've got in the long-term plan is for $630,000 for rates remissions. And looking at now, with all the modelling that Daniel's done in relation to the impacts on individual properties as part of the 17.4% rates increase, is that those properties that are currently receiving a remission, it could go as high as $900,000. So based on the rates increase, that would lead to a significant increase in rates remissions. So the work that we're going to talk to you about today, and that we've started some conversation with Councillor Tukapo and worked through some options to bring back to you today, are you comfortable with that level sitting at $900,000, or would it be more reasonable to keep it at the $630,000 that's budgeted? Another thing that we talked to Councillor Tukapo about was $625,000 is roughly 1% of rates. So there is an option to discuss limiting it to 1% of rates in any given year. So that's a point that we can talk about as we work through the options. What we'll do today is what we've talked about is, in the current financial year, we have $660,000 that's been approved in terms of remissions. If, as I just mentioned before, for each of the different parts and types of remissions, based on the budgets that are applied or proposed for next year, that could go as high as $959,000. So what we're going to talk you through today is, for a few different levels of the different parts of rates remissions, are there options for us either to stop that part of a remission or potentially cap it or limit the total amount of remissions in any given area? That would be with the aim of limiting the level of rates or remissions to the amount of the budget rather than going over. What it would mean is, if we were to provide remissions to everybody that currently receives those remissions, is we would need to effectively rate for another 300,000 or another 0.5% roughly to allow us to reach that remission.
Can I just test? So, and these numbers are all based on the assumptions around taking part of the representation and governance target rate and putting some of that into the general rate, right?
Yes, it relates to everything that's been assumed and is proposed in the LTP.
Sweet.
Yeah. So if it works, what I'll do is each of the areas that are highlighted in a very loose yellow color, we'll work.
Yeah. Just because I get a sense there might be how? So this is why I asked, for it to be held over, because I could see that it was going to spike and jump from what currently is to that, and I thought I thought it might be 200 and something thousand, but as you can see, it's in the 300. So, which is why when I had the little session, I thought of the budget, 1% is this is for the table to decide, but when you fix towards the budget and then you allocate accordingly, it's not only fairer, but it's something actually we'd be able to sustain, because if we just left it as the policy currently stands, it would just climb. And so that's why I sort of says there just needs to be a little bit more work, and obviously there's got to be rationale behind it and why certain ones would get capped and others wouldn't. So that's all. These are not my numbers. This is just how it really is looking, how it is, how it could be if we kept going. Because at the end of the day, remissions is applied and
the ratepayer picks up that bill. This is not debt funded. This is spread across everybody else that doesn't end up paying this. So, anyways.
How long are we projecting the Part 7 going to be running or trending at that level? Because the vast majority of that is around the revaluations related to Terra Ika, and ultimately we can't expect for that to continue year on year. So are we projecting when we'd expect that those changes to come into effect and be passed fully back without remissions?
Good question. In terms of the ongoing budget, we've budgeted at a level of approximately 630,000 in the budget. So in a way, we have limited it, but it isn't necessarily budgeted at an individual section or grouping that we're happy to provide it for. So definitely for next financial year, we would still need to continue to provide it, I would assume. But ongoing, in terms of how many years, David may have an indication in terms of what that might look like.
Potentially 2 to 5 years.
It still is a pretty big one for us, that particular remission. Yeah.
I'm going to ask it. This question is about the Part 7, which is there any way to get away from addressing that through a remission? Because the whole process involves QV doing a special valuation for those properties that apply for that. But why couldn't we set a date by which they have to do that, so that for the following rating year, their special valuation is the valuation that goes into the system rather than their increased, the higher valuation? Because if you did that at the beginning, then you don't need the remission, and it automatically distributes across all the other ratepayers from scratch. Am I making sense?
Yeah, you are. I guess the key reason is from a fairness perspective, everyone's valued in the same manner based on the district plan and the rules around the highest and best use for a property. So the mechanism which allows us to charge them less effectively, or at a rate that is not aligned with highest and best use or with the district plan, that needs to be through a remission mechanism. So you could, for example, if that became their mechanism going forward for a period of time, it wouldn't have the impact would still be the same, whether it's through a remission or whether it's through lesser rates from the Terra Ika property than is the highest and best use. So the mechanism, it's just a different mechanism, but it would result in the same impact on everybody else's rates, I would say. Is that? From a rating perspective, we have to recognize that benefit that they're receiving, perceive that it is a benefit from a rates legal perspective that they're receiving, because every other house that is zoned residential is paying at that rate. It's because we allow a special circumstance for them, then that becomes a remission. It has to become a remission under the rates.
Because one of the interesting features in the Terra Ika zone, as well as, and David might be able to speak to this more, but there's obviously a number of subdivisions in there that might have self-imposed covenants at time of development, which prevent the residential zoning from being utilised or exploited. And so that figure, particularly Terra Ika, might be like the tip of the iceberg, because I suspect that there's a huge number of property owners in that zone that don't necessarily know that this is available and so haven't used it. It's only been those big landholders who have seen significant increases that have come in I imagine, utilise this?
So with Taraika, normally everybody does need to apply, but because it was a significant issue during the evaluation process, we did actually capture everybody that was in that area and do everyone at once, rather than have them apply, because otherwise it could have been perceived to be a little bit unfair. So it isn't a normal practice that we would, but because that was a particular issue during the review, then we did it that way. If there are certain properties, for example, that have a certain covenant or something on it, and they applied to quotable value, there might be something that they can do in that case, because the highest and best use of residential, for example, couldn't be realised because of certain covenants. So that might be something that would be a separate area that we could have a chat about and might be able to be resolved. Yeah. So I'll do this one, then Daniel's going to talk through the rest of them. So with the part 7, or where there are properties that are zoned for industrial or residential and are currently still being used for farming, 70% of those are the Taraika ones. The current year emissions is 250, and it looks like it could go as high as 300,000 in next year. So one conversation to talk about today is, would it be reasonable to limit that remission potentially to 225,000 in total? So it still does give a relatively high level of remission relative to what others have. So what we're doing today is just, in terms of this section, is looking down at the particular groups. And what I might start with, actually, just to make sure it's really clear for everyone, is community groups are those small organizations where they can apply to us to receive a benefit towards their targeted rates. So there's a couple where we're proposing voluntary protected land. That's another area where people are doing some really good work and have public access to their land, and so it's to recognise and help them with their rates in those areas.
So as you're going through them, as an example, like the community group one, could you just give us one example of what that looks like in real time?
Yes, I believe that would be something like St. John or something out there who's doing a proper community activity. So then they'd apply and they'd get a discount on the rates they levied that way.
Generally, it is a community group that's running. It's a rates remission on the property that they're using for that activity, yes. Yeah.
So, on that point, the example of the White Street property at Foxton with the ambulance station, it's council-owned land where there's a width in the space.
Yes, and for part 2, the voluntary protected land, sort of a similar sort of situation. A good example is the Ngāwaki Himoi bush, which is, I believe, just been subdivided into its own separate trust, and they're going to allow public access. So that would be one that would become eligible for that remission once it's been subdivided off. So the key point is they're giving public access. And remnant land as well, that's where you have really strange pieces of land that have, normally they're sort of remnants of subdivisions. I know we have one that's up in the hills somewhere, it's like a 30 centimetre block. And under the rating rules, that would still get all the fixed charges because it's got a certificate of title. So that's just in fairness. But I believe there's only 2 of those.
So then we get back to the part 7 ones, which is mostly Taraika, as we talked about. Tararua Road as well, there's some around there in terms of... so from your... Councillor Jenny.
I was going to say, and will it become increasingly northeast Levin as well, in that quadrant, where some further intensification. It's because you've got a lot of rural properties in there that are paying.
Any area which is then going to be zoned for residential purposes and isn't currently, absolutely would start to fall into this criteria. Shall we move on to the So should we move on to? Does it work if we move through each one? We can talk about them all, and then we can circle back and look at the different
I'm
options.
just going to say while you're on that script, I like capping it. That's all I'm going to say. I don't know what the number is, but
Okay, so this is part 10. So we do currently have this in the policy. We've fleshed out the wording a bit, but we are proposing to put a cap on it of 25,000. Just giving how unpredictable it could be. We might not use it for years. Fingers crossed, we won't use it for many years. But then add the possibility to transfer that into a reserve if we don't use it in a given year.
So at the moment, we've got $100,000 in terms of the Mayor Relief Fund. So if in a given year this isn't used, it then could be used to top that fund up so that ongoing we are building up that emergency fund in case there are events in the future.
my only question to that one again would be, we have a live example right now. If people are willingly living in flood areas or natural zone areas, are they going to be able to continue to apply for this when they choose to live in those areas?
Good question. At this stage, it doesn't meet this criteria specifically, I wouldn't think, but it absolutely could in the future. I think the intention of this from the table was more where you have those something comes through, properties are red stickered, they're not able to be operated, or there's particular issues with their property through an event, and this would go towards helping them with rates relief until they got back in their homes.
And I definitely support that, but I suppose my point is that if we've got properties that are continually under this particular type of pressure, why would we continue to offer the same relief when there's ways around that? So that's all the point is. How you word it, I don't know. But
If we've granted consent for them to build there, Justin, would be struggling to understand.
yeah, I don't have any faith in that. Sorry, Benny. I see plenty of consented properties that shouldn't be built on.
Okay, so the next one is the Part 11 remission. So that is where we have a developer who's done a subdivision, so say splitting one piece of land into 15 or so lots. And that remission will provide a remission on the rates on the individual lots until they're sold. So that will be the fixed charges on each of the individual lots. So it can really depend on how much this is in a given year, depending on how many applications we get. But if we had a similar amount than we've had this year, it would be about 24,000 for next year. And so we're proposing or putting to the table today to remove this remission. And that's on the grounds that when it was originally formulated, took about longer for developers to sell the lots after they've been subdivided. And the market's a bit stronger these days.
Also, just to note that developers do have the opportunity they quite often will bring them all back into one parcel before the rating year occurs, so that they don't incur those fixed charges going forward if they plan to keep them and not sell them in that year. So there are still opportunities for them to maximize or minimize their rates in this area.
So just based on that comment and the settings, so this probably the bigger developers can navigate that issue, but in terms of the, say, smaller developers, mum and dad, splitting up a section into 3, thinking almost like our streamlined housing process. So it's mostly the fixed charges, isn't it? That they're trying to manage. Is there a? I suppose it's 22. Okay, thanks.
This one is a big one about who should pay, and really balancing that conversation around how are they different than somebody else in the district. Why? Because you've subdivided, should you only pay for one when somebody else who might own 3 properties in different spots pays for 3? And it's a question for the table. It's a question of what you think is fair, really.
Because ultimately, one of the considerations is at what point, particularly in relation to the fixed charges, does the demand for those services kick in? Is it once the section is split up, or is it at the point at which it's got a house on it, building on it, where someone's actually living there and has the ability to access and use those facilities? That would be the.
I'd say remove it. Fairness and equity.
Do we know how long has that policy actually been in place?
I'd have to check the exact. I think it's been a while, but I can check how long ago it was put in place. I think it would have been when there would have been a downturn in the economy and a number of developers were struggling with vacant sections.
And so at a time where council wanted to appear to be builder friendly, to encourage the development. So I guess one of the things we need to reflect on when making these decisions is our market is cyclical. So right now we're in a market where properties will sell. We're saying it's private cost, but it does come back around where it slows down as well. So I guess I'm inclined towards agreeing with remove. I'm just very mindful around that. There is a cyclic nature to this, that there would be a point in time where potentially it would be appropriate to have this sort of remission in place, and that before we take it away, we just reflect on what that could look like.
Thanks. And one thing I'll have a chat to Daniel about and see if we can make it work. Whereas, for example, you were to acknowledge the cyclical nature of it and say in this particular year or in any given year, we may offer zero remissions in this area because we don't see it as something that's necessary in a particular year. And that's an option that we could have a look at.
Yeah, thanks. I resonate also with Councillor Grimstone's comments, and I suppose, I wouldn't like, because of that comment, that you take away opportunity for those that require it genuinely to assist them in what they're doing. But I'm probably more concerned about the comment that was made around large developers able to bring their properties all back together to not be able to pay certain costs. And for me, that's probably the loophole that I'm more interested in closing than maybe just removing a remission at this point, if I understand how that mechanism works a bit better.
Yeah, sure. So from that perspective, they're absolutely within their rights to do it. So it's legally, they're absolutely just maximising their legal opportunity. So from that perspective, they'll be bringing all the titles back into one, because in that particular year, they don't see that they'll go through the sale process and then they can open them up again as they expect sales to happen. So it's important to note that it's completely legal and they're able to do it. What they're doing is maximising their financial returns in terms of our rating policy, but it's absolutely legal and able to be done within the rules.
Okay, so for the Part 12 remission, so this is where you have a ratepayer who already has a property that's paying a full set of targeted rates or full set of rates, and then they buy an empty bare section. They're able to apply, and this remission remits the targeted rates off the second section they buy. So we've had applications from both urban properties, so that will be someone who maybe has their domestic property and they buy a batch or a section to build a batch. And also you get rural properties who have applied as well, which I understand is a rural property that maybe buys a piece of land to do grazing in a different area or something along those lines. So 56,000 for this year, which would estimate it to be up to 80 with a similar amount of applications. And again, we're putting to the table to remove that, just on the grounds that it promotes, land banking, and you sort of have the opportunity cost of if a section was bought by another party who doesn't own a property in the district, they'd have to pay a full set of rates. So it's sort of a way of sort of similar to what you were saying before, Councillor Jennings.
would we have any idea the makeup of that 56 in terms of rural versus residential commercial zone? Because like on this, I'd be inclined to support removal for anything zoned other than rural, because like I think there's a strong argument that if you've got a bare piece of land that you can never develop in the rural.
It's mostly
It's mostly urban. Okay. Yeah. I think there needs to be a distinction between rural and other zoning, but
Look, I support its removal. I think in terms of we're looking across the whole picture of rates for emissions and the priorities that sit within that, and to me that simply doesn't stack up as a priority. So I support its removal.
What I'll mention at this stage is whatever decision the table is happy to go forward with as part of the consultation, we will absolutely need to make sure we write to everybody that has both submitted on this policy but also currently receiving a remission, so that they are aware of the impact of any changes if they go ahead. Because if it's Māori land, then they would they wouldn't legally they wouldn't legally need to pay rates. Yeah.
Okay, so for the Part 14 remission, so this is for excuse me, properties that are used for a single purpose, so a farm, for example, but they're not able to get contiguous rating under the Rating Act because they might be in different names. So contiguous rating is where you have the same sorts of properties that are used for a single purpose, and then we have to in the legislation have to rate them as if they were one. So in this scenario, you'd have a farm that was in sort of a single name, and then they buy another property maybe under a different company name just because of how they're structuring things, but they're still used for the same farm. This is when this remission would come in. So we had, I believe, of the applications received last year, they were 99% rural, so it is a sort of farming scenario. We've proposed to keep this remission, but put forward that it's capped at 50% of the targeted rates rather than remitting the full 100%. And yeah, 36,000 this year, but that would, by capping it at 50%, we'd estimate 18,000 for 24-25.
It's just highlighting that none of these are easy ones. So it's just proposing something to start the conversation if we want to come down from 900 to 600.
How many impacted ratepayers are there in that make up that 36k?
So there was 38 properties that received it in this current year. So one of them was urban and the rest were rural.
Could I just understand why they get a remission at all? I just don't get that.
It might be one large farm, for example, and it's on different pieces of which they're treated as one because they might be contiguous. But then you might have another property, which is then it might be ABC Farms Limited, and then for example, the sister and the brother might then come together and buy another piece of land that's not exactly the same in terms of ownership. So that provides the targeted rates relief effectively because the land value and everything's the same, but there is a separate lot of fixed charges on there because we have a largely fixed charge rating system, and so that provides a remission for those fixed charges.
yeah, so I was going to jump in and say that's why I think when elected members are working through this, talking about fairness, people have to understand that then a farm that had 10 different portions of land that comprise that one fund are paying 10 lots of contributions to the library. Is that fair? And so it's the same with the development one in terms of that common ownership. Like day one, that one property pays one library charge at the moment. As soon as you turn it into 20, but it's still held by the developer, hasn't been sold yet, hasn't gone through the process, you're expecting the developer to pay 20 contributions to the library before it's even been sold. So that's what we're basically, so 14, 13, and I've forgotten the other number, 12. Like, you have to take a principled, consistent approach. Otherwise, I don't think you are actually promoting fairness.
And that's the tricky bit, talking about taking away the fixed charges, but also just meant like this table has had a real preference for fixed charges, seeing as the most fair. So that it is a balance in terms of how that works.
I don't have that same feeling. I think when you indicate that you're moving from one property to 20 regardless, then the intent's there. And so, I don't agree at all. I think, rate them. Otherwise, as Councillor said, remove it.
Okay. Oh, sorry.
Can I just, I wonder if the approach on, you've still got another one to go, but I wonder if the approach is, could we model what 50% reductions across all of these look like, so on a principled basis, so that it kind of covers the point, although I disagree with Councillor Tamihana that, we shouldn't be viewing these things as just ATMs, but I think if we're going to reduce, maybe everyone should share the pain. I'd be keen to see that more.
Okay, the last one to talk about is the last three parts, which are earthquake strengthening, second dwellings. That's the second SUAP on the property where it's not being rented for money to a family member, and the special circumstances. So the proposal is to cap those at a maximum of 25,000. So those are all of them. If what I propose we do for this last part then is to, Daniel will bring up the small model that we worked through to come up with the initial scenarios that we talked through, and then provide you with the opportunity to suggest other options that we might like to look at that might get us to roughly 600,000. Broadly, though, is there agreement across the table that we should stay at the 30,000? So broadly, everyone's in agreement with that. Okay. So now we'll just swap over for 1 second.
The piece that I'd be slightly uncomfortable with, right, is we're about to go out into a long-term plan, and part of the messaging about long-term plan is council has some tools to support our community, and essentially this discussion is pretty much saying we're at this point now and there is no money. So our messaging's a bit conflicted, that on one hand we're saying we've got ways to help, and on the other hand we've actually just limited or kept those ways to help to the exposure we've got right now.
Effectively, the proposal was we go from the current year of 660 to the cap of 630 being 1%. It's a $30,000 difference at this stage.
I think and the conversation I know we had before we went up for consultation was around the affordability one as well, but that didn't go forward in terms of consultation. The option to potentially look at affordability based remission. So was that what you were signaling, Councillor Grimson?
And remind us again, the compassion housing, that's ring-fenced because that's part of our agreement at the time we entered into the sale. Is there a date for when that would potentially cease? And I guess Given the life cycle or time frame of these, I wondered whether there was any benefit to looking at modelling it into year one might be 100%, year two is 50%, and year three is nothing. Because when you start to look at the bare land example or the land use for primary industry, if you had it stagnated or on a descending basis, that might help limit that exposure and control and land us where we need to, while representing the fact that if you ever move that piece of land or use that piece of land for 3 years, well then guess what? You are going to be up for paying the 20 unit titles relative to that.
Just curious, what's actually the basis of the compassion housing remission? What does it come under?
So I'm just conscious that we are live streaming, and that was a commercial decision that council made when they chose to transfer the pension housing stock. But in terms of what information is publicly available, council owned an asset that was valued at the time less than what council owed on the asset. So council had a suspensory loan to the government of $5.5 million of that asset, and council also owed itself about $5.5 million of the asset, but the asset was only worth, I think its book value at the time was, well, the market value at the time was $5 million, and so when council went to the market on the asset, recognising that it was trying to find an opportunity to clear all of its debt, that meant that council needed to look at other options to incentivise interest from community housing providers at the time in order to clear the debt on the asset, which council successfully did. So the rationale for it is that it was part of that final negotiation stage between the successful provider and council to essentially achieve a better price to pay back the debt.
Okay, for the interests of commercial sensitivity as well, we have excluded council's properties and compassion housing from the mix in terms of the conversation today, so that we can show you the options. So those two are out of the mix. So we're effectively at a $336,000 target in terms of those the properties. So that excludes our ones as well as community housing. So if it works, what we'll do is we'll go through each part, and you can signal to us in terms of any potential change to the cap that you would like to make or put forward. So currently the community groups, we are proposing that they will receive a full remission based on their estimated rates for the proposed for next financial year. Is there anyone that would like to propose a change to that? Okay, I'm not sensing change at this time. Then
just a question though, Jacinda. So at the moment we have, has that been 30,000 for a number of years now, or has it been pretty consistent, or in terms of that? Because we're raising by 20% the amount.
Typically, anyone that has applied and met that criteria in the past has received it.
Yeah.
So that increase is really just to make sure that those same people or same groups will receive the same level based on the targeted rates that they're expected to be charged for next year.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with that increase.
Okay, the voluntary protected land, same thing. That would mean that everybody that currently is applying would receive that. Their full rates as what were the level that they are or plan to have for next year. Remnant land, so that's the small pieces of land, at $2,000. Part 7, this is the one that I'm sure there'll be some different opinions on.
So, can I just understand with Part 7 whether all we can do at this stage is introduce a cap rather than fiddle with the settings? Because I have some attraction to Councillor Grimstone's thinking around, could it be a stepped change? Like, so take a Tara Ika property as an example, where year one after the rezoning, they get X percentage, 100% or whatever, and then over the next 3-5 years, it steps down, because basically we're saying, yeah, like we're willing to accept that there's been a change. It can be a shock for that property, especially if they're not utilising it for its best and use, as you say. But that over time, we're saying, yeah, that benefit has to diminish over time, because the ratepayer can't the ratepayer can't keep absorbing or subsidising that cost. But if we introduce that, that's a substantive change to the actual settings of the policy rather than just introducing a cap. So that's problematic, isn't it? Given, well, can you comment on that?
Administratively, it's a bit more challenging because of the individual properties and where they come from and which ones have come in and why they've come in. So, for example, it's like because we've rezoned another part of the district, it's doable. Introducing a cap is probably going to achieve somewhat fairly close to what you're trying to achieve, but it will be more uniform across the group. So if a property, for example, has been in there a long time, as we introduce it, then they would receive the same reduction as would Tara Ika coming in year 2. It's possible.
I like the cap at 150.
What's the basis for that suggestion? Like, what's the methodology? They're not developments. They're people who are sitting on a property at the moment. We've come along with a change of a pen, change the district plan that says your property is now zoned residential. That might have been a rural property for 100 years. So, yeah, look, yes, there's a potential benefit to them in terms of now being able to utilise that land and the value of that land increasing. But unless they actually sell it and develop it, they're not realising that benefit.
Are there any other preferences in terms of levels?
I'd be quite interested just to probably explore that step reduction as well. But yeah, I'm very mindful. I know last year a lot of the community we spoke to around this area, like they've done nothing different for the last how many generations or whatever, and probably some of them don't actually have intentions of doing anything different. But I guess they're caught in this, you know, this gap where they are going to be impacted quite dramatically. And the last thing I'd like to see is them driven away from what they're doing as far as income goes, because we've decided to change things, right? So for me, the cap would be the 225 minimum, but I think we sort of need to look at maybe a little bit deeper, just around what that means. I totally understand there are some people that will capitalise on this, but there's definitely a few families there that I feel pretty new.
During the rates review last time, I definitely felt that pain from a number of families in terms of, yeah, it's definitely, it's a big hit for people, yeah.
Jacinda, I'd imagine with the next valuation being 2025, there's the ability to then have a reset in terms of this as well.
Yes, definitely. It's something that we every year we could reset if we wanted to, and we could incorporate it into the annual plan round in terms of a conversation that's ongoing. So we definitely can. Yeah.
Oh, well, on that basis, I'm comfortable with 225 as well.
Okay, how about natural? Anybody else that wanted to comment on levels? So broad support for the 225 rather than the 150. Is that right? Okay. Then emergency events being 25.
Sorry. In practice, we're talking about the tornado event. We didn't actually use this because we funded rates through the meal relief. So I think it's a good placeholder, but it doesn't necessarily mean we'll need it.
It is it's more of a placeholder, yeah, and allows us the ability to build up a bit of more of a reserve for future. Yeah.
Yeah, I support that. I think it's probably good to build that bit of resilience in there, especially as we go forward. You don't know.
Okay. So this one probably is one that will. So the subdivision one. So subdivisions which are in common ownership but do not meet the criteria of a contiguous property. So those are where there are separate units, effectively. We are proposing effectively a cap of 0 on this for this financial year so far. There are 22 properties that currently receive this remission, and they are mostly urban.
So how it works in practice is that most of these properties are probably enjoying it for 1 year, or is this long term?
It would be 1 year. So, for example, if a developer subdivided in June, we rate as at the 1st of July, so it'd be the whole following rated year. But if they got their timing right and did it in July, then it wouldn't come until the following rated year. So there is ways for them to. It would just be if they did it before the 1st of July.
If someone is going to separate their title, you would hope they'd be able to get it usable in the next year. Okay, I'm picking up no willingness to add some cap at this stage. Would that be correct? Okay. How about the bare land Part 12 remission?
I'd probably like to see this one stepped as well, but I'm probably going to be out of luck. But I think that there will still be some people there that will be impacted quite dramatically here. Just to cut it automatically. But yeah, if it was stepped, I think it might be more user friendly.
So stepped as in maybe half? Is that?
Yeah.
What about Part 14 in terms of contiguous rating, not in common ownership? So that's where you have, that's the likes of quite often the farms that have an extra piece which might be owned separately. And they are mostly farming. There's 38 properties in this one. So this current proposal probably would have an impact of around $500 on the property. If the remissions are about $1,000, they would receive half of it rather than what they're currently receiving. They currently receive about a remission of about $900, but that would go down to around $500.
Per property, per ownership group.
this is the hard bit now where we have an extra if we want to meet our $630,000 target, we've got about $40,000 to find. And that assumes as well that we are going to limit the additional remissions that we've got for the separately used or habitable parts and the earthquake strengthening to 25,000. Is there a will around the table to limit that or to keep that at 25,000?
It's new, isn't it?
Yeah, I think I'm comfortable with that because I'm okay with that. I just have a question for Paul, maybe though. You know, you talk you want to step part 12, and then we're happy to only do 50% of part 14. I wondered whether part 14 might be more of a priority than part 12, to be honest. And my way of thinking is that we almost should swap those around.
That's what I'm going to ask.
Yeah.
So I'm the same as Mayor Bernie. I think between 12 and 14, I'd deem the priority 14. Why not 12 is because I guess currently most of those who apply are urban, so effectively they're getting relief on bare land in urban and sitting on it. It's a type of land banking, in my view, where we want to encourage infill. So, yeah, I much prefer to support the scenarios within the rural community for the part 14.
Sorry, I need to clarify. So, part 11. Which one?
12, I said.
And 12 is mostly farming. So 12 is mostly farming. 12 and 14 are mostly farming.
Sorry, well then I'm looking at the wrong. There's some up here. Fox and odd ones. So both apply. Well then it has to be fair. There's got to be 50 each. Not one heavier than the other.
It's a little bit mixed. The exact number of part 12s between urban and rural, it's a bit mixed. Maybe it's about the exact numbers. I'll have to count them, but maybe it's about half and half in that one. There is an option as well as a potential. I might be tempting fate, but in this first year where we're introducing caps, and potentially because we have the Mayoral Relief Fund, we could not have an amount in for the emergency and then bring that in the second year, knowing that there is some change happening. That's one option to talk about.
And can I just clarify it? And so, in terms of how the cap will work, people will have to apply by a certain date, and so therefore the total number of applicants, if the dollar value exceeds the cap, then there's a percentage applied across all those properties. It's not first come, first serve, anything like until the cap's exhausted. Just so that's good.
Just in terms of expediency for the table with the 15, it's not spending too much time on 15,000, but as a suggestion, shall we have a go then at prorating that remaining amount across the rest, just to make sure that we can make that work? Okay. Thank you for your time. I think so. We'll work that up and come back with a summary of where that's landed and what that means for properties, and then this will come to you as part of the adoption of the long-term plan, and we would propose that in the CD we will mention some of these impacts in there as well, so that it's clear for everyone.
Just clarify that, just so that you're talking about the adoption of the consultation document, are you?
Consultation document and supporting information being the rates remission policy.
Plan, I just thought.
Oh, sorry, supporting information for the law. Yes. Thank you. Thanks for your time.
So James and Daniel have an exciting land transport program business case workshop ready for us. We might just give you a 2-minute break. Fuel yourself, because